And we just heard a track called Strike the Moon. It's taken from an original soundtrack to a video game, Guardians and Metal Exterminators. It's by Jerrel Dulay. He is a founder and developer and producer of Sydney-based indie video game series Silver Falls. And he releases his video games predominantly on Nintendo platforms. As a matter of fact, I have, hopefully, Jerrel on the line at the moment. Hello, Jerrel.
Hello. Hello there.
Welcome to Eastside Radio. I hope you enjoyed listening to your recording there.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I was going to ask you, what kind of music exposure or training did you have growing up in the US, and how did you get into the video game business?
Oh, primarily I had training in a high school for music. I was in the choir and the band, so I have some formal training there, but the majority of what I use these days for my music composition is self-taught through self-study based on going beyond what I learned in school. And I've always taught myself to create video games since I was young. That I knew at an early age that was the career that I wanted to go into other jobs where you earn money more readily, I was able to set myself up as an independent developer.
Cool. Just thinking about the music part of your business and the video game production, how do you approach the art of creating a soundtrack for the games? What makes a good soundtrack, in your opinion?
A good soundtrack complements the end product, and it doesn't necessarily stand on its own. A good soundtrack is designed bespoke for the game in which it is being presented, and it heightens the immersion and the emotional connection that players have with a game. So it's most effective if a team works very closely together and the composer works closely with the writers and the directors. I think soundtracks tend to turn out weak for video games when they are outsourced to a composer who is not connected to the development team, the writers, and the artists. And for me, I develop all of my own games myself. So my art, stories, sound effects, I do all myself, but that also means that my music is very strongly tied to that work. So it can be a coherent cohesion. That's what I can focus on for my music. And what is exciting to me for writing this music for different games is I can explore different genres and different eras of music, and I can research all of that, and I can bring that into my music so I can make sure each soundtrack that I create stands on its own in a unique way and is interesting in some way.
Yeah, right. By way of full disclosure, I should say Jerrel and I get together from time to time, and we play music, but not the type of music that Jerrel plays on his video games mainly, and not the type of music I play on across the universe. It's mainly old-time music, me on banjo and Jerrel on a variety of instruments. So speaking about the music for your games, tell us something about the instrumentation. Do you use acoustic, or when do you go to electronic or synthesizer music? How do you manage all that? How do you decide the best sort of instrumentation for your soundtracks?
That's the kind of question that is most exciting to me, because every game that I create, I try to create with its own identity. It's unique in some way and stands alone. And depending on the story that I'm creating and the setting, I can use a different mixture of synthesized or acoustic instruments. My game series called Silver Falls, it takes place in the mountains in a small mountain town, and there are usually some degree of alien exposure, UFO contact in this small mountain town. And depending on the amount of UFO contact the story has in each different game, if there's more sci-fi elements in the story, then I introduce more synthesized instruments and synthesized sounds into the soundtrack. I have some games in the Silver Falls series, of which there are, I believe there's 10 different games in the Silver Falls series now. Some games don't really have any UFO contact, and so I tend to focus on using strictly acoustic instruments. And so those are things like mandolin, guitar, fiddle, banjo, and to that degree, it's exciting to be able to use different instruments. And in the track that you played, Strike the Moon, the game is set in the 80s, and it's very much designed to evoke that sort of power rock feeling and a sense of freedom and adventure and excitement in the 80s. So I went with an 80s rock style for that whole soundtrack. And I got to create music that I don't normally get to create. As you mentioned before, we normally, you and I, we volunteered previously at the local hospital, and we played music that wasn't necessarily 80s rock music. But with Strike the Moon, I got to play the kind of music that I really enjoy hearing, that rock music. And I experimented with different instruments, like an electric mandolin, which was heard in throughout that track in Strike the Moon.
Right. And just one last question, Jerrel, we won't keep you. It's getting past your bedtime, or certainly past my bedtime. So when I think of video game music, I think of Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Super Mario, like simple melodies. But this is now a huge genre in its own right. We have symphony orchestras playing video music concerts. So where do you see the genre going in the future, in the next, what's coming up in this genre?
Well, what's most exciting is that for the people in my age group, we are, in our late 30s and, people in their early 40s and 50s that grew up with video games through various decades. This is such a validation of a big part of our all personal identities, is that we grew up with video games, and for decades it was sort of seen as a sort of a niche thing, but to see things like The Legend of Zelda and even like Pokemon and Super Mario be performed in the Sydney Opera House, it's such a validation for many people that find a great passion in this music. And to me, it's such an inspiration that the people that created those games, which is basically entertainment for kids, the people that created that music are very serious musicians and composers that have studied all around the world, and they're creating, before they created video game music, they created very serious, wonderful, incredible music, and they take that passion and skill into video games. So for those composers that I grew up with, it was something that was very important to them. And so the technical limitations and constraints of the electronic digital format is not indicative of the passion and the expertise that went into the compositions. And that is clear when we see those compositions performed in the Opera House. You can hear this is real music. And so for me, I want to make sure that I do my best to live up to those standards as a composer for video games. And I see this becoming more and more mainstream because we see composers like Hans Zimmer, they're contributing to video games, and we're going to see more and more of that. It's already quite commonplace these days, but as the years go on, we'll see increasingly even more.
Mm-hmm. Jerrel, it's been a pleasure sharing your vast knowledge of the video game music on Eastside Radio and on across the universe, and I look forward to playing some music with you in the near future as well.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on the show.
No problems. Thanks, Jerrel.
Take care.